It's extremely common for us to feel a little bit lower during the winter when days are shorter and they're colder. However, there are those that suffer from what is called seasonal affective disorder when those periods of low mood become extreme due to the winter season. But what exactly is seasonal affective disorder? Hey guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, and this week, like I said, we're going to be taking a look at seasonal affective disorder. Now, before we get into the details of exactly what seasonal affective disorder, or S.A.D, is all about, we need to have a little bit of context to what to expect or what we can already understand about seasonal affective disorder. The first thing I would say is that it's a pretty applicable time for this video. Obviously, it's turning to winter right now, the days are getting a little bit shorter, there's more darkness, there's less sunlight, and the days are also getting pretty cold. And as a result, it's probably common for us to experience periods of low mood or a lower sense of mood due to those shorter days and colder weather. However, seasonal affective disorder is a little bit different, and it was actually established as a condition by the American Psychological Association in 1990. So seasonal affective disorder is different from experiencing low mood due to the winter, and it's also a diagnosable condition. People really do suffer from what is known as seasonal affective disorder. But what is this disorder all about? Well, fundamentally, it's when depressive symptoms get worse during the winter season. There is something known as summer onset seasonal affective disorder, but we're not going to go into too much detail about that right now. We're primarily going to be focusing on winter associated seasonal affective disorder. And around about 7% of the population actually suffer from seasonal affective disorder. Now, like I said earlier, seasonal affective disorder is a little bit different from when we just experience low mood or periods of low mood due to the shorter days and colder weather. What makes S.A.D different from that is when these depressive symptoms become more consistent and more extreme due to that change in season. So what are some of the symptoms of S.A.D? Well, things such as low energy, low mood, trouble sleeping, and loss of interest in things that you once enjoyed. Now, these are all things that you probably would associate with depression in itself, but what makes S.A.D different is that those depressive symptoms are triggered by the change in season, by those shorter days and colder weather. So how does all of this happen? We have a general understanding about what S.A.D is, we have a little bit of an understanding of the symptoms as well, but what exactly is it about the change in season that causes people to experience these periods of low mood and ultimately sometimes be diagnosed with S.A.D? For all of us, our circadian rhythm, which is basically like our internal body clock, is affected by the season's changes, especially in the winter when the days are shorter. However, some psychological research infers that those that suffer from S.A.D might be impacted by this circadian rhythm change or the change in our biological body clock due to those shorter days in a more extreme way than everybody else. For example, this same research infers that people that suffer from S.A.D can be more sensitive to sunlight, and due to the seasonal change and there being less of that sunlight, these people can be impacted by that to a greater extent. Serotonin exposure can reduce due to a lack of sunlight exposure, and as again I've said, the research infers that those that suffer from S.A.D suffer from this to a greater extent. Melatonin, which is a hormone that helps us get to sleep, is also impacted by the shorter days and can also have a factor for those experiencing S.A.D. The main issue here is that melatonin knows to kick into the body in order to start that process of getting tired to go to sleep when it's darker. Now that affects all of us, but once again, those that suffer from S.A.D have a greater sensitivity to that. The melatonin exposure, that hormone exposure, due to more darkness during the day, increases those depressive symptoms or that chance of depressive symptoms from those that suffer from seasonal affective disorder. That means that when winter comes in and those days start getting shorter and it's colder, but there's longer periods of darkness, then we have more exposure to that hormone melatonin. So we know a little bit about what S.A.D is, we know some of the symptoms, and we also know why a change in season can affect somebody's depressive moods and can ultimately help somebody be diagnosed with S.A.D. But why do some people experience seasonal affective disorder and some don't? Well, the research gives us some examples of this and where this is the case. For example, women statistically suffer more from S.A.D than men do. People that suffer from mental illness suffer from S.A.D on a more regular basis and can be diagnosed with S.A.D on a more regular basis. People with a history of depression and anxiety can experience S.A.D to a greater extent and again be diagnosed more consistently. The young also suffer from S.A.D more regularly than the elderly. Also, and probably not all that surprisingly, people that live farther away from the equator suffer from S.A.D to a more regular extent. For example, in 2012 there was a research paper published that compared the levels of seasonal affective disorder from those that lived in Ghana to those that lived in Norway. The study found that Norwegians suffered from seasonal affective disorder and depressive symptoms as a result of the winter season more regularly than people that lived in Ghana, largely due to the fact that there was longer periods of darkness, there was less sunlight, and it was colder. This will probably come as no surprise, but it just gives us a little bit of background, a little bit of an understanding to the extent of which longer periods of darkness over the winter months, the colder weather, less sunlight, can really have an impact on depressive symptoms. There's also something to be said here about the link between sleep, S.A.D, and depression. The connection between sleep deprivation and depression has been in research and been understood for decades. We actually recently just published an article, a guest blog post by Megan Hemming, on the connection between sleep and mental health on getpsyched.org.uk. I'll put the link in the description on that, and I encourage you to go and have a look at that. Now, it goes without saying really that sleep patterns can be impacted during the winter months, and so people that suffer from S.A.D experience more depressive symptoms, of course, to a greater extent as well, but also people who don't really feel those depressive symptoms during the year can experience more depressive symptoms in the winter months because of those changes and the way that their sleep pattern is impacted. So what can we do to treat seasonal affective disorder? Well, therapy in general will be really helpful, of course. However, some specific forms of therapy have been shown to have great impacts. CBTI, which is cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, has actually been proven to really help people that suffer from seasonal affective disorder. Light therapy has also been shown to be highly effective. This is where an individual sits in front of artificial light for about 30 to 60 minutes every morning. And the purpose here is an attempt to try and assimilate sunlight without harmful UV rays. Now, this process of therapy might sound a little bit strange, but the research has shown to be that it can be really effective for those suffering from S.A.D. You yourself can also take steps to alleviate symptoms of S.A.D and stop it from affecting you altogether. Spending general time outside, even when the weather's overcast and even when it's cold, can be really beneficial to suppress those symptoms that we experience from S.A.D. Another thing here is that if you have to spend prolonged periods of time indoors, then try and maximise your natural light exposure as much as you can. Open the blinds in your office, open the curtains in your house if you're doing work at home, and try and increase your exposure to natural light as much as possible. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. This week, like I said, we've been looking at seasonal affective disorder. We've been looking at a little bit about what S.A.D is all about, the symptoms of S.A.D, how some people suffer from S.A.D and others don't, and also ways that can positively impact the treatment of S.A.D. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. If you've been enjoying GetPsyched, then make sure to hit that subscribe button, and you can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button, and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully catch you next week.